Picture the UK. Historic cities, old castles, gentle countryside full of sheep and pubs. Open wilderness or animals out of wildlife documentaries probably aren't the first things that come to mind. That's because in a country around the same size as New Zealand or the US state of Oregon, we have around 13 times as many people, and so most of the country is used to feed or accommodate the population. We have some amazing national parks with birds of prey, deer and other furry things, but there aren't really any places that look as they would have done before humans came along and changed the landscape. This is, however, until we look to the coastline, where in many places ecosystems have remained more intact, and further from the reach of humans, many larger predators still sit at the top of complex food chains. Pockets of coastline across the UK show off a wild and important part of the country, hosting a huge range of animals, plants that help regulate the climate, and also being directly important to us for things like tourism and fishing. Although much of the UK's marine habitats have been degraded over the last few centuries, there are still hotspots where ecosystems and wildlife thrive. And in this video, we're going to go to one of these places, explore what makes up these ecosystems, and see some of the work that's being done to protect our wild coastlines. One of these places are the Channel Islands, an archipelago next to France, which for historical reasons involving the Normans and various kings, are British Crown dependencies. People often think of them as small, quiet islands where people grow vegetables and spend too much time with their cows, but the larger islands of Jersey and Guernsey are fairly urbanised, famously being offshore hubs of the finance industry. But despite this urbanisation, there's still a lot of space for nature here, with green hills and wetlands, and of course being islands, abundant coastline. Some of the smaller islands like Herm, Jetu and Sark punch above their weight for nature, with only a handful of residents, no cars, and apart from some small harbours, not much infrastructure around the coasts. And with currents sweeping in from the Atlantic, the waters around these islands host a huge variety of life. All of this biodiversity has meant that some spots have been named as Sites of International Importance under something called the Ramsar Convention, a conservation treaty which aims to protect important wetlands across the world. For example, the coasts of Herm and Jetu form one of these sites, with a breeding colony of grey seals in the north and isolated cliffs where puffins come to breed in spring. The Atlantic or grey seals weigh in at 200 to 300 kilograms and are a top predator on the fish around the islands. This would almost seem like a haven for them, with predators being rare or non-existent and with isolated rocks for them to rest and raise their young. However, in winter these islands can be harsh and have one of the biggest tidal ranges in the world, so it's the conditions and the number of safe places to shelter that limits the seal population here. In the south of Herm, the flat, shallow coastline gives way to tall cliffs that are perfect habitats for seabirds like gulls and cormorants to roost. In spring, the Atlantic puffins arrive, and they stay until midsummer to have a chick with their lifelong partners. They use cracks in the cliffs or burrows to safely lay an egg and take turns to incubate it while their partner goes fishing for sand eels. Using specialised beaks, they can bring back lots of fish on a single trip, and within 2 months their puffling is fully grown, and the birds head out to spend the colder months fishing on the open sea. Heading to the most northerly island, Alderney has its own Ramsar site, with a large population of northern gannets, and each of the different islands has its own unique spots which have been given that special designation. Conservationists have been working to protect these areas, and I've been helping a team to survey the habitats around the Herm and Jetu site, as well as helping scientists who are using the resources here to help restore habitats across the UK. Because while it's great that we can come out and enjoy these places, things like plastic pollution and invasive species are threatening the local wildlife. So that's why we're out here surveying what we have, so hopefully we can protect it in the future. To have the big, impressive animals like dolphins and seals, you first need something at the base of the food chain. The primary producers that sustain themselves and make everything else possible. On land we have plants, and in the sea it's generally plankton and algae. But these shallow waters also support a very special type of plant, a marine species whose ancestors lived on land only for them to evolve back into the sea again, like the ancestors of whales and dolphins did. These are seagrasses. Here a species called eelgrass, which forms blankets of long green blades stretching up from the seabed in shallow waters. As primary producers, they use light to create organic material, and while many producers are a food source for other creatures, the eelgrass actually provides a place to live for many animals. The long blades slow down the current, providing a sheltered nursery for young fish, and home for much more life than you'd otherwise find on bare seabed. Animals that make the beds a home include cuttlefish, which sometimes lay their eggs on the seagrass blades, and whose internal shells you may find washed up on the shore. There are pipefish, relatives of seahorses with ribbon-like bodies which they can hook around the seagrass blades to avoid being swept away, and which helps them to blend in. Around them live many other species of small fish, snails and crustaceans, many of which you can find across the shoreline. Seagrasses are also plants, so unlike seaweeds, they build extensive roots which strengthens the seabed, whilst also enriching it with the oxygen that they produce. This makes them ideal for animals living within the sand too, like razor clams or tusk shells. Similar animals live in nearby rock pools, such as mussels, anchoring themselves down with muscular threads to filter food from the rich water. And chitons, small creatures with shells made up of overlapping armour plates, slowly moving over the surface of rocks to graze on algae. These small animals living around the seagrass and the rocky habitats form the next levels of the coastal food chain, as they rely on the primary producers for food and habitat. Above them are more specialised predators with adult fish like wrasse or pollock, alongside the cuttlefish that come in to feed at high tide. But whether you're a crab or a clam, fish aren't the only danger. Seabirds like oyster catchers and turnstones patrol the beaches, using their strong beaks to prise apart the shells of anything that can't hide before the tide goes out. The fish in turn have cormorants diving down to catch them, and gannets swooping down from above. Even birds that are normally found further inland come to take advantage of the abundant food. Of course, humans do so as well, fishing and farming for oysters, scallops and ormers, the latter of which is a local delicacy, since within the UK at least, ormers are only found within the Channel Islands. These habitats also support less edible creatures, like anemones, relatives of jellyfish that use their stinging tentacles to catch small fish and crustaceans that swim too close. The snakelox, with its violet tipped tentacles, is mostly green due to a symbiotic relationship with algae that live within their bodies. The algae produce simple nutrients via photosynthesis, and in return they get a protective home and access to more complex nutrients when the anemone catches something. You'll notice these snakelox are white, and that's because I filmed these in the old Guernsey aquarium, and indoors where there's no light for photosynthesis, the relationship with the green algae breaks down. The anemone's relatives, the jellyfish, can also be found in the area, and they are key food sources for sunfish and passing turtles that, although generally prefer warmer waters, are occasionally spotted around the islands. So, in providing habitat for animals lower down in the food chain, it's clear that seagrass has an important role in supporting these diverse ecosystems. But if you need more convincing, seagrass is also important for us and the climate on a large scale. Just like plants on land, as seagrasses carry out photosynthesis, they take in CO2 and use that carbon to build their bodies. As they die and plant material builds up, that carbon is locked out of the atmosphere, helping to regulate the climate as part of the natural carbon cycle. Despite covering just 0.1% of the sea floor, seagrass meadows may store 11% of all the carbon in the oceans, and can take in carbon up to 35 times faster than plants in tropical rainforests. This places them alongside mangroves and salt marshes as marine habitats with huge potential for climate change mitigation. Sadly, seagrass is also very sensitive, and studies have found that the UK has lost around 90% of its seagrass over the last few centuries, due to things like nutrient runoff, physical damage from construction and trawling, as well as pollution from sewage and industry. But there is reason to be optimistic. Because of the importance of these habitats, scientists have been leading an initiative called Project Seagrass to start restoring these habitats across the UK. They need to collect millions of seeds in order to start planting them in other parts of the country, and I helped one of the researchers when she came to gather some samples from the Herman Jetty Ramsar site. Thankfully, the seagrass was producing healthy seeds that had a good chance of surviving the onward journey to universities in Wales, where they would be put in nursery beds to help grow more seagrass habitats. And after a day of surveying Ramsar sites or collecting seagrass samples, we travelled back from Herm to Guernsey, and between the islands we got to see some of the area's most charismatic residents. Predators like bottlenose dolphins sit at the top of the food chain, capping off an ecosystem in which everything we've seen has a role. Plankton, algae and the seagrass provide food or shelter for small animals, which then provide food for bigger fish, and populations are ultimately kept in check by predators like the dolphins and the seals, providing an example of a balanced ecosystem. Pockets of coastline, like those around these islands, show us that despite being a highly developed place, the UK can still host impressive and fully functioning ecosystems. And from the Isles of Scilly to the Outer Hebrides, our marine world shows us a wild side of the UK that is often forgotten about. Of course, these places are no longer completely wild since humans live here and have built around the coasts, and a lot of fishing and tourism understandably takes place. But if we can appreciate the importance of our marine ecosystems and work to protect them, we can surely live around them sustainably and continue to watch them grow in the future. If you want to learn more about these ecosystems and UK marine life, I've added references and a number of websites and books in the description. Thanks again for watching.